I will introduce the next speaker, Mr. Walter Unterrainer. He's coming from Austria and has been a professor in Umeå up in Sweden, in the architect school there. And now we have taken him to Denmark, and now he is a professor up in the architect school in Aarhus.
Yeah. Good afternoon. Well, I have not been taken to Denmark. I went by my own will. When I was in Sweden, I read every year that the Danes are the most happy people in the world, and nothing could stop me to come here. So that's why I'm in Aarhus now and teach at the School of Architecture. I'm talking about architectural space, its transformation, and many different aspects of transformation. Destruction and is also a transformation of space, like something building on the green grass is transforming nature into a built environment. So all aspects, and I connected to the impact to the environment. It's not only the natural environment, but also the social and the economic environment. What we see here is also a church. It's a Catholic church. And it's not more than a church. It is the oldest building in use, at least in Europe, probably in the world. It's almost exactly 2,000 years old. It's a fantastic building. The light here is too bright to see the beautiful light really in the quality that came in through this hole when I took the picture. What do you think is the diameter of this hole? What? 5 meters? It's 9.1 meters diameter. It is in Rome, and it is called the Pantheon. Pantheon means all the gods. So it was built in pre-Christian time. It's not very clear what gods it was serving. But in around 600, it became a Catholic church. And this photo is, I think, 2 years old. You have the feeling it looked always the same, but this is not the reality. There is several reasons why this building is still existing. A lot of or most of the Roman classical antique buildings are ruins. They were demolished by the popes, and with the material they built new churches, etc. But there was something that gave this building the respect and other things that it survived. But this was 150 years ago, and if you look at this, there is something different. And even if it is a photo, one of the early photos, so the building was not that holy that there was not by some Renaissance, late Renaissance architect built on some symbols of a Catholic church to an antique building, but it did not last. It turned back to the situation as it is now. I think this building, to say it with Marcel Proust about 100 years ago, remembrance of things past is not necessarily the remembrance of things as they were. So there is always a history behind that, even if it looks very static. The building itself was always loved by Romans. And that is a key condition that it survived. People don't demolish things which they like. And the building is one of the most adaptive buildings in terms of use. You can imagine it was a temple for many gods. It was a Catholic church. It's a graveyard. There is 2 Italian kings buried. It's a place for, so it was for funerals. It's a place for wedding, and it's one of the key tourist attractions in Rome. So this change in use and this quality it radiates gives it a long life. It's an extremely innovative building. It's a concrete building. It's opus cementum. It's a form of cement which has been done, and it has 43 meters in diameter, the cupola. It's 6 meters here and 1 meter here, and it's a structural masterpiece, only working, because there is no steel in it, by using lightweight aggregates from volcanic stones. The hole is not only a light inlet, it reduces the weight of the dome, and these casetas, or you could see it as decorative aspects, actually create ribs. They are strong enough to keep the structure and at the same time lower the whole weight of the own structure. So something we can learn from, not to copy it, but as a way of thinking long life buildings, which is one strategy to be sustainable. And to sum up this building, I call it preservation by robustness and adaptability to new use. Not all churches are treated like that. This was one of the biggest churches in Europe. It is in Cluny, and it was destroyed during the French Revolution. And this is a poster where they were selling the materials for a very fair price of this church. So of course there, as we heard before, there's a lot of, I call it political and cultural impact in what you do with churches in special and old building in general. And it could lead even to a violent obliteration like here. About 150 years ago, there started an architectural discourse about what to do with old buildings, and these were two of the main representatives, John Ruskin and more known Eugène Viollet-le-Duc. The one said, restore it, and restore it in an honest way. That means don't play history, give it the meaning it has for us now. And authentic means it is a monument, best don't touch it, and it cannot, when it was built, it was finished. While Viollet-le-Duc said the building is never finished, it is a processual thing. And this is a discourse which in every project has to be done on the desk when you design it for yourself, because it can become a schizophrenia between ruining it or preserving it. Sometimes by some sorts of preservation you can even ruin. I'm not going too much into that, but to ask this question, what is the value, and or do I have to improve something? For me, it is very strange, this building, that I saw from outside. It has 3 window rosettas showing to the city a Gothic window, and if you know Gothic windows, how nice light they bring into a room, and here I don't see any. So there is a very strict separation and between inside and outside. This transformation was not only on the building scale, it was also on the urban scale, and this was the medieval Paris, and that was the opera, and then that was a design decision, 2 lines, as architects also do today. And they were cutting in the 19th century new roads. This is the Google Earth picture, and built the boulevard. The boulevards were built basically for military reasons, and also, but they were also said they helped to de-densify the city and make it more hygienic. But there is in some countries more than in others, a tendency that you always demolish a lot of things what has done before and make it better. In the same city, and only 90 years ago, this was the Plan Voisin, very famous by rather young than Le Corbusier, who wanted to demolish not only some roads but the whole city. This is the Louvre, and replace it by this what he called living machines. It was an idea of ahistorism. And I think that is why a lot of modernism has failed. If you are not respecting cultural values and identities from the past and think you start from scratch and make it better. And that's the reality. That's not very long. I took this photo actually standing on the cupola of St. Paul's Cathedral. And these were buildings built in the late 60s. They all looked like that. And they were 8-9 floors high. They have a big potential to be retrofitted, to be densified, to make another building inside and create atriums and all sorts of things. Nothing of that happened. These building machines demolish floor by floor all the buildings. A lot of energy is used for demolition with these machines, destroying all the embodied energy needed to build this building and tripling it up with the energy building it up again. All the resources were transported to somewhere by thousands of lorries, creating a lot of dust and noise. So this is not a good way to do it. It's not a very sustainable way to do it. And it is a destruction of resources. And we as architects, or you as coming architects and engineers, have an extreme responsibility for that. Because it's about resources on the level of whole urban areas. They get more and more empty. What are they done? And it's down to the bucket of the painter. What has been put on the wall, what toxic things, how it is thrown away. So we work, when we talk about transformation and waste, on all scales. According to the United Nations, the waste problem is the fastest growing environmental problem on the globe. It's faster growing than other problems like CO2. There is 3.5 million tons waste produced every day globally. In the European Union, it's 492 kilos average, and Denmark is unfortunately the worst, with 668. Only Switzerland, which is not part of the European Union, has more. So I'm not going to be moral or political. I'm going to show you this diagram of Germany. And the most interesting thing is the yellow part, which is about more than 50% of the whole waste. The green part is this green part is household waste. That is what is thrown away. The yellow part is waste produced by buildings. So it's more than 50%, and there we are directly responsible as architects and engineers on how to dramatically reduce these problems. And I show now a few examples how that can be done. This is a building in London. The project is 20 years old by Ron Heron. I like it. It was an old front house and the back house, and it did not work very well. And it was transformed into a creative center. It's called the Imagination Building. You cannot see the building, really. You have to go in a courtyard, and what you see is this very funny additions here. But what the architect did is, instead of insulating it, it was not allowed anyway, the brick walls, etc., he united the two buildings into one and created with a low weight, light transmitting, translucent textile waterproof membrane, a space which is a sort of atrium, which is a meeting space, and these bridges connect the different floors and give an exchange between the two parts of the house. And that has been done in a very good way down to detail. It's a very inspiring building itself. It shows it's a spatial solution and not a technical solution. During night, it is a lantern in this area. It radiates light to the neighborhood, and it is a very good example of spatial thinking and spatial transformation. That wouldn't help much to this building. It is it's a school. It was built for 10 years in the 70s in Austria, and it was designed to be there for 10 years. But everything, at least in my country, that is designed for short use has the longest use. So it was used for 30 to 35 years. Inside, it had the charm of a prison, so not really a creative place for children. And it was not possible for the community. The schools primary schools are run by communities in Austria to pay the heating bills. It was enormous. So they made retrofitting, and they took away the bad facade anyway. They let the primary structure, the stairs, everything in. The skin was changed. The energy consumption was lowered by factor 10. It's a passive house standard. And it was not only seen in a technocratic way, let's save energy, it was also seen in a very humanistic way, let's do something for the children. And opening the roof, bringing natural light in, the prison effect was broken by the separating wall having opened and giving a more generous feeling. Here you see individual ventilation. The oxygen situation was very bad, and it's not only bringing in air, it's also a heat exchanger. So this strategy I would call give something bad a second chance. It doesn't mean to make tabula rasa. Use what can be used and transform it into something good. And there is a lot of buildings like this. I'm not showing this project. It was a big transformation I did in Germany. It is, if you go with a thermal camera through a lot of European cities, this in winter, this is like a crime movie. When you see what the energy losses are. It is in Bavaria, and I had 314 kilowatt hours per square meter a year energy primary use for housing, and we brought it down to 37. And that was not this building. This is just the opening of a social housing. It's not a fantastic architecture, but it is a sensitive improvement, and it is, of course, an iconic picture for showing that this was the annual oil for 38 apartments before renovation, and this is after renovation. So you can do a lot. We have a lot of responsibility. But how, and there is some other things. This is an example from Aarhus, which I think is very stupid. The facade has some values and should be kept, but it should be turned into something different. Of course, so it's a fake. You kept the skin, everything inside was demolished, and that if at the slightest wind, not everything collapses, you have to invest in a big steel construction. The only use of this expensive construction is during the building time to support the walls. You could do a lot of more intelligent things with the costs of this steel construction. The point was that they were demolishing all the slabs because these slabs were not strong enough and not soundproof. The point is there is other solutions. I will show one now. And to have this fake, I have rather the tendency to say, okay, if you are that far, why keep this rest? So that is what I did in a similar building. We left the beams inside. They were exactly 100 years old. They were extremely hard. You hardly could cut them with a saw. You had to do it with a steel saw. They were very dry, so no new wood would have been as good as that. But they were not strong enough, and they were not soundproof, the slabs. But what we did a hybrid construction. So we put on 6 centimeters of concrete and connected it structurally by dowels, which is like a concrete slab. Instead of steel, you have the wood as the tension element and the concrete as the compression element. And at the same time, you change the structural quality, structural potential, the soundproof, and the fire properties of this building without demolishing it. So, and that was as you see, the structural diagrams of the engineer. This is not the only solution. I just show that there is always other ways and examples than demolishing it. Another view or aspect of old buildings, I'm talking about these very dense housing. It is in Brussels. It's working class houses built in they are protected listed buildings because although they were for the poorest, and in terms of density, that was a slum. It was so many people lived there, but the building quality was extremely high. And this was the narrow lanes in between. It's quite central in Brussels. And it is one of the most wanted living areas there. The difference is that when it was built, the flats, they have about 65 square meters. On these 65 square meters, there lived 6 or 7 people, 4 or 5 children. Now there live singles, or sometimes maybe a couple, who can afford these now very expensive flats. So actually, without the change of the building, it was some preservation done. The value went up, and I call this silent gentrification. We come back to that. So it is a revitalization, which is just keeping it as it is, but because it was upgraded, of course, the original owners never could afford the rents of these apartments nowadays. And this is a very interesting example. I lived in London between 1971 and 1973, and then it was just built. And it was called the Tower of Terror. Trellig Tower. There was an incredibly big crime rate around and in the tower. It was flooded on a Christmas evening, and vandalism, everything. That was 1972, and it was discussed to demolish it. It's a failure, a typical failure of some machine thinking in terms of housing. Now, in 2007, one-room flat costs £250,000. So it became one of the most expensive parts in London because you have a fantastic view. You are in the center of London, and there is, of course, less families with children in these areas, and they are able to pay more. And it was a change of appreciation. The object is exactly the same, but 40 years later, the value it had in the heads of the people has changed. This is a new building. Well, it's a few years old now, and it did not look like that half a year later because it was already designed for transformation. It's in Chile by Studio Elemental. It's low-income families, very, very small houses. So they could afford that. That was the investment. And that space was given to them by the architect in an anarchistic way to say, do what you want. If you have the time and the money, just make something out of it. And they did. And I must say, and that is the question, why do you laugh now? Is it because it's better, or did they destroy the fantastic idea of the architect? I think they did exactly what the architect wanted. And I think this is a way of thinking away from the finished object to even new buildings, to the design of a process-orientated habitat which can adapt to needs. So there was a lot of creativity. That was the inside. That's the architect's drawings. Of course, I would like that more, to be very honest. But I'm not ignorant to say, well, you have to do it. If she is happy with that, it's her business. It's her life. And I think building for change, this is sort of a proactive transformation thinking. It's not retrofitting, is a very important aspect. And actually it happens. That is how cities, not in Denmark, but the real cities in the world are growing. This is in Nairobi, 2008, and look how it developed. So cities are less and less planned. And even in New York, they don't have any city planning anymore. So there is, of course, that's another issue, another story. And the important thing is to know what is the percentage of old building. In Denmark is, after the UK, country where most of the buildings are built before 1960. So there is a high responsibility towards history and towards cultural heritage. And I show you now a project which was done as a thesis project by one of my students in Aarhus, Morten Ørsager from Copenhagen. So he did the job, and I challenged him, and I helped him out of the casual depression he went into because it was so much work. It is it's called Borg. It is a students' dormitory. It's in the center of Copenhagen, so you see here some pictures, historic, how it looked. It is a protected building. It's cultural heritage. But and there are students from I don't know how many different nations, international students living in, and they like this house. To live in the center of Copenhagen as a student in an environment like this, very luxury, and they accepted to some extent the disadvantages it has. My students was at the same time doing scientific and artistic research. So scientific research was he measured the temperature change that is in October in different rooms orientated different to the south, to the north, etc. And there was a very big difference. And he made a questionnaire and that was the comfort over the year. That was in winter. Only 50% found it was good, but 50% found it was much too cold. In summer, they said it was too hot. What he also measured, that is also, no, it's not, well, I show it here. He also measured, it comes later maybe, the CO2 concentration in the rooms, and that was very high. He did some testing with thermocamera to look at the heat losses and where the cold surfaces were. Yes, here he measured the CO2 level, and this is the limit. So you should not go over that. So if you are around there, people start getting headache. There, it's a health problem. And you fall asleep always. So also not good for studying. So he measured that, and then it was clear he could not touch the historic things. He could not change the window frame, etc. But this, what is it called, a Laden, or what in German it's a shutter. Yes, it's a shutter. This was not original, so he could do something with that. And he was testing different materials with the camera. So on-site testing, what could it be? It should be thin. He used reflective materials, which is reflecting the infrared radiation, etc. And he came out then with a proposal. And he did also other things. He was making a thermal simulation, and he found out, he measured the air untightness of the building. It was totally untight, and was presuming to lift the tightness dramatically, and used the old chimneys for a very simple form of ventilation, using also the hall as a distribution area, and this is the old chimney in or inlet it was before, in every room. And then he calculated. So it had 290 kilowatt hours per square meter a year now. If we reduced the air tightness to a factor 0.5, where he found ways to do it without destroying anything, that was going down to 149 individually. If he changed the glass to energy glass, it went down to 187. If he changed, and he was allowed to do that, only the insulation behind the radiators below the windows, it was about 1 square meter per room, it went down to 197. And if he made these two together, he lowered the temperature, the energy loss from 209 to 139, and then he came into 119, which is only 50% of now, by introducing a mechanical ventilation that only works when the students are in the room, so they get a sort of a key card like you have in every hotel, and when you are in, the ventilation is on, and when you are out, you don't need it. So without change, this is a very old building, without changing anything substantially and thinking also on the user behavior, he was lowering the consumption by 50%. And I think this is a very important aspect because conservation, culture, history is one aspect, but the questions of our time, like climate, CO2 is another, and you must find a balance. You cannot go and have one solution like in a cooking book where you look at a recipe and then you do it on every building, then you would destroy it. And I'll show now the last project, which is this. I talk about this building and about this building. It is another way of retrofitting and transformation. It's in Paris. This building here, I took the photo last December, is not existing anymore. It was already due to demolition. So they were knocking it down. That should happen also to the other building. The other building was built 1959. It's called Tour de Bois de Prêtre. It was seen as a modernist social housing in a quite good quality. But because of its thermal comfort problems, and of course because changes that when they built it, oil did not cost anything. No one was talking about CO2, etc. Then they changed it in the 80s, and they were gluing on some polystyrol. That is the main way of retrofitting, which I think is an environmental catastrophe in many ways. And it was also an aesthetic catastrophe, because people did not like that building. So that was finished in the 90s. And then it was supposed, 15 years later, to knock it down and rebuild it. And Drouot and Lacaton and Vassal, they were making a proposal, and this is how it looks now. I'm not going into detail. That was an extremely exhausting process for the architects because instead of pushing it down, they were adding spaces and changing the flats, but not in a bureaucratic way. They say, okay, you get a winter garden and a balcony, and you get more space, and you pay more rent, etc., and we save the building, and we save a lot of cost. They were also negotiating inside the building between the tenants, because there were old ladies who only had a cat, and their children were now 45 years old, but they had still the big apartment, and they were not very happy because they had to clean the apartment and they had to pay it. So to stay in the same environment with the same neighbors, but give your apartment to someone who needs a bigger one and get with better economy a smaller one was a good thing, but it needs a lot of organization. And that was happening in this project. So they were taking away these polystyrol walls, and instead of making another wall and left the old primary structure, they made this prefabricated layer, which is a 2-meter winter garden and a 1-meter balcony. And they could also do it while a lot of people lived there. That's a main problem for retrofitting, is where do people go while it is done? So it was a very soft way to do it. So you could stay there. You had your curtains there, and the building workers made this new layer outside. So that is, they took away part by part and then added the new things. And that is how it looked now. It has a new entrance, the whole environment around was changed with generous places for garbage and bicycles, because this is an area where it's very important to have social control, and you don't have hidden bicycle and garbage rooms where people are afraid to go. But you don't have to be afraid to have this apartment. So social housing in this quality in the center of Paris, I think is really something where you feel there has been done something with the same money that was used for some technological improvements to make something better and give more and better space to the people living there, and at the same time to improve the energy consumption. The elevators were transparent, so you are not seen, but when you go up, you have a view to the city, and you are not in a dark elevator cage. A lot of people are claustrophobic. You are filtered in a way, but you get daylight. The balconies are used in many ways. So people are putting out flowers there now. That photos was in winter, but in summer it's also giving them an identity to show their individuality to the city. Again, I don't think that every high-rise building from Palermo till Oslo should be treated the same way. Architecture is not about cooking recipes, but we should get inspiration by architectural way of thinking in transforming. And I want to finish with one of my teachers. He's very old now, Luigi Snozzi, who always said every building intervention is a destruction. Whatever you do, when you change something, you destroy something. In any case, destroy with brain. Thank you.